Introduction. Friends, if you're in the mood for a chilling, unpredictable, and completely unique horror experience, then you're in for a treat with the film Barbarian from 2022. This movie isn't your average haunted house story. It's packed with twists, turns, and moments that will leave you staring at the screen in disbelief. If you're visiting our channel for the first time, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on our latest movie breakdowns, reviews, and insider info. In today's video, we're going to take a deep dive into everything related to Barbarian. We'll start by talking about what kind of movie Barbarian really is. Is it horror? Is it a thriller? Or is it something completely different? You'll find out. We're also going to explore where and how you can watch this film, whether it's available on a streaming platform or if it's showing on a satellite channel near you. I'll tell you exactly where you can catch it in the best quality and with the best experience. We'll then take a trip behind the scenes and get into the technical details of this film. What was the creative process like during pre-production? How was it filmed? What techniques were used in post-production? And how did the music and sound design play such a critical role in building the eerie atmosphere? We'll also look at how long the filming process took and how the filmmakers managed to bring such an intense vision to life. Of course, we can't skip the numbers, so we'll discuss the film's budget, how much was spent to make it, and how it performed at the box office. Was it a success? Did it exceed expectations? Or did it quietly creep under the radar? I'll give you all the figures and a breakdown of its financial journey from release to reception. But that's not all. I'll walk you through the entire story without spoiling the ending, just enough to get you hooked. You'll get a small review from me where I'll talk about the tone of the movie, the pacing, and why this story stands out in the horror genre. This isn't just about jump scares, it's about smart storytelling, unexpected reveals, and real tension that builds from start to finish. We'll also take a closer look at the cast of Barbarian. Who are the main characters? Which actors brought them to life? And how well did they perform in their roles? Were there any surprises in the casting? How do their performances elevate the horror and emotional weight of the story? I'll share my thoughts on which performances stood out, and what each character contributed to the film's tension. And yes, we'll even explore some of the lesser-known facts about the movie, how it came to be, why it was titled Barbarian, what inspired the plot, and how audiences reacted to it when it was first released. You'll learn about all the creative choices that helped make this film such a standout in modern horror cinema. So friends, if you're curious about what makes Barbarian such a talked-about horror film, and you want all the juicy details from start to finish, stay with me till the end of this video. You won't want to miss what's coming up. Let's get started and uncover everything there is to know about Barbarian. Barbarian doesn't just tell a horror story, it toys with it. It starts like a small, simple tale of inconvenience and suspicion, only to grow into something massive, multi-layered, and deeply unsettling. The story begins with Tess, a young woman arriving late at night in a dilapidated neighborhood in Detroit. She's booked an Airbnb to stay the night before a job interview, but when she gets there, she finds that the house has already been rented out to someone else, Keith, a seemingly polite and gentle man. This alone sets the stage for tension. The audience is instantly trapped in the same psychological headspace as Tess. Do we trust Keith? Do we trust anyone in a horror film? Every decision, every moment of kindness from him, feels just a little bit off. And yet, Tess decides to stay the night, and so begins the uneasy build. The movie plays on social dynamics, gender, power, trust, paranoia. Tess's caution is balanced with her empathy. She's not reckless, but she's human. She makes choices that feel real, even if they're not what we, the viewers, would want her to do in a horror movie. And this is where the brilliance begins. Barbarian uses our expectations against us. We're primed for one kind of horror, a home invasion, maybe a stalker, maybe something supernatural. But what we get is something entirely different. When Tess discovers a secret passage in the basement, and then a tunnel beyond that, and then something even darker waiting at the end of that tunnel, the film veers off the rails in the best way. What we thought was the story ends abruptly. Then, without warning, the film cuts away. Time shifts. Characters change. Suddenly, we're with AJ, a Hollywood actor in the middle of a scandal, completely disconnected from Tess and Keith's story. It's disorienting at first. This kind of hard narrative turn doesn't happen in traditional horror films. But Barbarian isn't interested in being traditional. AJ's storyline introduces new layers. He's egotistical, oblivious, and completely ill-prepared for the horror he's about to stumble into. He returns to the same house, not because he's investigating anything, but because he wants to sell it to pay legal fees. He doesn't even question the eerie vibe or the hidden basement. He's only focused on the square footage. That's the genius of it. The character that viewers would typically expect to lead the story is actually the most unaware, the most vulnerable in ways he doesn't even realize. He blindly wanders deeper into the house's underground horrors, tape measure in hand, while danger breathes down his neck. This perspective shift doesn't just shake up the plot. It creates a contrast between survival instincts and toxic entitlement. Where Tess moved carefully, AJ stumbles arrogantly. And then just when you start to feel settled in this second storyline, the movie flips again. We go further back in time, to the 1980s, and meet Frank, the house's original owner. A quiet, creepy man who goes to the store for baby supplies and plastic sheets, who installs a bell system in his basement, who disappears into the darkness with young women never to be seen again. It's not just creepy, it's vile, and it turns the stomach in a way few films do. This flashback is short, but it reframes everything. It tells us that the house isn't cursed, it's contaminated. Its rot is man-made. The terror below was created by cruelty and isolation, not by ghosts. The story then returns to the present. Tess and AJ, now both trapped beneath the house, must survive the monstrous being that lives in the tunnels. A malformed woman, referred to only as the mother, who acts with a strange blend of aggression and affection. She isn't just a monster. She's the result of years of abuse, neglect, and inbreeding. And this is where Barbarian deepens its themes. It's not just horror for shock value. It's horror born from real-world terror. What happens when evil festers unchecked? When violence is hidden behind closed doors? When neighborhoods are left to rot and disappear from public memory? From this point on, the film becomes a raw survival story. Tess, injured but determined, is no longer the passive observer. She becomes the heart of the story. The one person who cares enough to go back and save someone, even when logic says to run. AJ, on the other hand, continues to show his true nature. Given a chance to redeem himself, to protect someone else, he fails. He rationalizes his actions, tries to paint himself as a good man who simply made mistakes, but the film doesn't let him off the hook. His ending feels earned, brutal, and symbolic. Every turn in the narrative serves a purpose. The early mystery gives way to terror. The terror shifts into grotesque history. That history reemerges as a living, breathing threat. The story is structured like a house of horrors with hidden floors you never expected to find. The linear path is abandoned in favor of a puzzle box that unfolds backward and sideways. It forces the audience to adjust constantly, to reevaluate what kind of movie they're watching, and who they're supposed to root for. Even the supposed monster becomes sympathetic by the end, while the real villain, Frank, barely speaks a word, but leaves a decades-long scar. The emotional impact hits on multiple levels: fear, confusion, shock, sorrow. The film explores the horror of being unheard, the horror of being trapped, and the horror of discovering that evil isn't always loud or dramatic. It's sometimes quiet, hidden, methodical. By the end, the viewer isn't just scared, they're unsettled. The house may have been demolished in the mind, but its implications linger. Barbarian tells a story that breaks its own rhythm again and again to expose new horrors, each one deeper and more personal than the last. The character development in Barbarian isn't just about giving characters backstories, or putting them through a few plot beats. It's about revealing who people really are when the surface falls away, when comfort is stripped, and when they're forced into primal decisions. Each character isn't defined just by what they do, but by what they choose not to do, what they hesitate over, what they ignore. It's one of those rare horror films where character choices drive the narrative more than the horror elements themselves. The monsters are terrifying, yes, but the characters' reactions to fear, vulnerability, and responsibility are what shape the entire emotional impact of the film. Tess is easily the soul of the film, and the only character whose arc is genuinely redemptive, courageous, and transformative. She begins as a regular woman just trying to get through a stressful situation. There's nothing exaggerated or stylized about her. She's cautious, smart, kind, and a little unsure of herself. When she arrives at the double-booked house, every decision she makes feels grounded in real-world logic. She doesn't rush into anything. She evaluates Keith's behavior. And even when she chooses to stay, it's not because she's careless. It's because she's trying to be fair. This early behavior says a lot about her core personality. She doesn't like making assumptions, and she doesn't want to treat people with unnecessary hostility, even if she's nervous. That empathy and reason become vital to who she becomes later in the film. As the story progresses and she uncovers the hidden passages in the house, her transformation begins. She could walk away, report it, and never look back, but something compels her to investigate, to understand. This curiosity isn't framed as foolishness, it's tied to her moral compass. Later, when she escapes the underground and has a clear opportunity to leave the nightmare behind, she makes the choice to go back, not because she's reckless, but because she knows someone else is still trapped. Her arc from tentative guest to a protector and survivor is powerful because it isn't forced. It happens naturally, choice by choice, shaped by fear, compassion, and bravery. Tess isn't a superhero by the end. She's simply someone who refuses to let the darkness win, even when it almost consumes her. Keith, by contrast, is less a fully developed arc and more a character designed to disorient the audience's expectations. He enters the film as an apparent red flag, a man in a strange house at night, with a woman he doesn't know. But what the film does so cleverly is show how these assumptions can mislead us. Keith is awkward and well-meaning, but his every action, no matter how polite, is laced with the possibility of threat because of how Tess, and the audience, perceives it. His role is to reflect how gender dynamics can create tension even in innocent interactions. His abrupt death shocks not just because it's brutal, but because it flips the table. He wasn't the villain. He was just another victim, proof that the real danger isn't always the most obvious one in the room. Then there's AJ, the walking personification of denial and entitlement. His arc is the most complex in terms of character study because it's not about growth, it's about exposure. AJ enters the film in a totally different register. He's upbeat, self-centered, a little pathetic, and completely out of sync with the horror that has already occurred in the house. He's introduced through the lens of Scandal, a famous actor being accused of sexual misconduct. From the beginning, he positions himself as the victim. He doesn't reflect, doesn't apologize, doesn't listen. He just looks for ways to salvage his image and career. This sets the stage for a character who is fundamentally incapable of self-awareness. When AJ enters the tunnels beneath the house, it's like watching someone step into their own symbolic underworld. He doesn't grasp the danger, doesn't see the warning signs, and literally measures the underground corridors like they're a real estate asset. The beauty of his arc is that the film tricks you into thinking he might change. For a few moments you think, maybe he'll face his flaws, maybe he'll make the right call. But when Tess is in danger, and AJ is presented with a choice, help her or save himself, he throws her off a water tower without hesitation. Even in the aftermath, as he stammers through a monologue about how maybe he's not a good person but he can try to be one, it's clear he hasn't changed at all. AJ's arc is about peeling away the layers of performative decency and exposing someone who will always choose self-preservation, no matter the cost. His ending isn't just earned, it's necessary. He's a mirror for all the men who think being nice, or misunderstood, excuses their actions. And then there's the mother, perhaps the most misunderstood character in the film. At first glance, she seems like the classic horror movie creature, grotesque, silent, violent. But as the film digs deeper, it reveals a character who isn't evil, but born into horror. The mother is the result of years of inbreeding, captivity, and abuse. She lives in the tunnels created by Frank, the true villain of the story, and mimics the only role she's been forced into, that of a mother. Her actions, terrifying as they are, stem from a warped understanding of love and care. She isn't malicious, she's desperate. Her attempts to nurture Tess and AJ, forcing them into the roles of child and caregiver, are heartbreaking because it's the only form of connection she's ever known. Her relationship with Tess is particularly fascinating. There's a moment of odd tenderness between them. Tess doesn't scream, doesn't fight, she observes. And in return, the mother becomes protective. This strange bond speaks volumes about the film's deeper ideas. That monsters aren't always born, they're made. That trauma isn't just felt by victims, it's inherited by those trapped in the aftermath. The final scenes, where the mother sacrifices herself for Tess, reframe her not as a creature, but as a product of cruelty who still tries, in her broken way, to do something good. Her character never becomes fully humanized, but the film gives her just enough emotion to evoke empathy instead of fear alone. Frank, finally, is the ghost that haunts everything. Not in a supernatural sense, but in the way trauma echoes. His brief scenes are chilling, not because of what he does on screen, but because of what we know he's done. The neat house, the silent demeanor, the routine, all hide a history of abduction, abuse, and horror. Frank is the origin of the rot. His role doesn't change, but it colors every character who enters the house. The mother is his legacy. AJ is a modern echo of his behavior, different in method, but similarly remorseless. Tess, ultimately, is the one who breaks the cycle. The character development in Barbarian operates like layers being pulled back, one at a time. No one is what they seem on the surface. The story forces each character into a corner and waits to see what part of themselves comes out. Some find strength. Some reveal weakness. Some never change at all. And it's this depth, this refusal to settle for simple heroes and villains, that makes the characters in Barbarian linger long after the horror ends. The performances in Barbarian are not just about actors showing fear or screaming in the dark. This is a film that demands subtlety, patience, precision, and a deep understanding of how horror works, not just as a genre but as a psychological experience. Every member of the cast delivers a performance that feels deliberate and rich, shaped by silence just as much as it is by dialogue. They don't react like characters in a horror movie. They react like people who believe they're still in control until they absolutely aren't. And that illusion of control, built and shattered across every role, is what makes these performances so riveting. Let's start with Georgina Campbell, whose portrayal of Tess is as grounded as it is gripping. Tess is not a scream queen. She's not reckless, nor is she the type to make ridiculous horror movie decisions just to move the plot forward. Campbell plays her with a sense of quiet calculation. From the first frame, we see Tess weighing her surroundings, assessing risk, trying to navigate a socially awkward and potentially dangerous situation with grace. There's no panic in her voice when she first meets Keith, just tension contained in her posture, in the way she speaks just a little too carefully. Campbell doesn't need dramatic monologues to make us understand Tess's inner world. It's all in the way she watches. When she walks into a room, she scans. When she talks, she chooses her words. She plays Tess like a person who's learned that the world can turn unsafe in an instant. And that instinct makes every decision she makes feel earned. As the story deepens and the situation shifts from uncomfortable to horrifying, Campbell subtly transforms Tess from a cautious guest to a determined survivor. And she does it without ever losing the character's emotional core. Even when crawling through dark tunnels or being dragged by a monstrous figure, Tess doesn't feel like a standard horror heroine. Campbell doesn't play her for shock value. She plays her with emotional honesty. Her empathy, especially when she chooses to go back and help AJ, isn't melodramatic. It's exhausted, deliberate, and human. That emotional stamina, the ability to hold on to compassion even after facing trauma, is what makes Campbell's performance so complex. She never overacts. She lets the character breathe, struggle, endure. By the time the credits roll, Tess feels less like a horror character, and more like someone you know. Someone who survived not because she was lucky, but because she refused to abandon herself or others. Bill Skarsgård as Keith is one of the smartest casting decisions in the film, and it's not just because of his horror pedigree. Skarsgård's presence immediately puts the audience on edge, but not because of anything Keith does. It's because we expect him to be dangerous. And that's what makes his performance so brilliant. He plays into that tension without ever stepping over the line. Everything he says feels like it could either be sincere or carefully calculated. His efforts to make Tess feel comfortable are awkwardly charming, but also suspiciously eager. He offers her the bedroom, insists on showing her the wine being opened. He does all the right things, but they feel just a bit too right. And that's intentional. Skarsgård walks a fine line between warmth and discomfort. He makes us question whether our own internal alarms are accurate or biased. The fact that he turns out to be innocent isn't just a twist in the story, it's a twist in how we judge character. What's even more impressive is how he never breaks character for the sake of shock. He doesn't smirk. He doesn't drop hints. He plays Keith as a genuinely decent, nervous guy who just happens to be in a situation that feels inherently unsafe for both of them. His performance lingers long after he exits the film because it's the emotional bait-and-switch that sets the tone for everything that follows. Keith teaches us that in Barbarian, no one is what they seem, not even the ones who seem dangerous. Then we get to Justin Long as AJ, and this is where the film's tonal brilliance really takes off. AJ is one of the most fascinating horror characters in recent memory, and Long brings him to life with a performance that's both hilarious and horrifying. He starts off with that signature Justin Long charm, fast-talking, self-deprecating, kind of likable. But that charm quickly becomes a mask, a distraction from the character's deeper flaws. Long doesn't play AJ as a villain. He plays him as a man who refuses to admit he might be one. His entire performance is built around denial. Even when faced with horrifying allegations, AJ is more concerned with what it means for his career than the lives he's impacted. He's constantly trying to reframe himself as a victim, and Long sells that with chilling believability. What makes his performance so impactful is how he allows the cracks to show slowly. At first, he's comically out of place in the terrifying house, measuring square footage while the audience is screaming at the screen. But as the tension builds, we see the real AJ surface. Long expertly reveals a man who will say anything to make himself look good, even as his actions become more selfish and cowardly. When he and Tess are trying to escape, and he makes the snap decision to sacrifice her to save himself, it's a gut punch. But it's also a culmination of everything we've learned about AJ. Long doesn't play him as evil, he plays him as weak. As someone so obsessed with redemption in theory that he fails to recognize the real moral choices in front of him. His performance isn't about a man becoming a monster. It's about a man realizing, too late, that he always was. Matthew Patrick Davis as the mother delivers a performance that's almost entirely physical, and yet somehow, he gives the film one of its most emotionally complicated characters. In any other horror film, a naked, hulking, underground-dwelling figure might just be the monster. But Davis makes her something else entirely. He gives her grace, weight, and tragedy. Every movement is measured. Her groans, her gestures, her desperate efforts to mother the unwilling. All of it feels both terrifying and heartbreaking. Davis doesn't play her as a predator. He plays her as someone who only knows one way to express love, and it's through a distorted mirror of her own suffering. You see her longing for connection. You see the pain behind the violence. It's a deeply empathetic performance, built entirely through body language, pacing, and presence. And that's what makes her so memorable. The mother could have been a generic creature. Instead, thanks to Davis, she becomes a symbol of generational trauma and monstrous innocence. And finally, Richard Brake is Frank. With barely any dialogue, Brake delivers a performance that is absolutely chilling. He doesn't need to speak to convey evil. He is evil. His face, his movements, his cold eyes, everything about him radiates control and decay. What makes Brake's performance so effective is the utter mundanity of it. Frank is not theatrical. He's not enraged. He's not even expressive. He's methodical, quiet, unflinching. That's the horror. He's the type of man who can commit unimaginable crimes with the same emotional energy someone else might apply to making a sandwich. When we see him in the past, preparing his basement, his blank expression is more terrifying than any jump scare. And in the present, when he lies frail and forgotten in bed, there's still a thick, suffocating power in the room. The direction in Barbarian isn't just skillful, it's fearless. Zach Cregger doesn't make the choices most directors would. He doesn't follow a traditional horror blueprint, doesn't structure the film around predictable jump scares or familiar tropes, and doesn't treat genre expectations like rules to follow. Instead, he turns the entire structure of the film into a tool for building dread, forcing discomfort, and ultimately confronting the audience with the question, do you really know what's coming? He uses the very grammar of cinema to disorient, challenge, and eventually upend the viewer's entire sense of what kind of film they're watching. The result is not just a horror movie, it's a narrative trap disguised as one. The genius of Cregger's direction lies in the way he controls the viewer's emotional state moment by moment. The opening of Barbarian is a masterclass in restrained, suspenseful filmmaking. Tess arrives at the Airbnb in the middle of a rainy night. Everything looks normal, almost too normal. Cregger uses this very ordinariness to build unease. There are no sudden shocks, no eerie music cues. Instead, he lets the camera hold on locked doors, flickering lights, quiet conversations. What makes this so effective is that nothing obviously scary happens at first. The horror is completely psychological. Every gesture from Keith is ambiguous. Every small decision by Tess feels like a potential mistake. Cregger doesn't fill this sequence with traditional horror cues. He removes them, and in their absence, the audience supplies the dread themselves. Cregger is clearly playing with our internalized genre knowledge. We've seen horror movies before. We know this setup. A young woman. A strange man. A house. Something has to go wrong, right? Cregger leans into that expectation and stretches it to its absolute limit. He lets entire scenes pass with nothing happening, just so the tension builds not from what's seen, but from what isn't. That's what sets his direction apart. He doesn't show you the threat right away. He shows you the illusion of safety, and lets you slowly realize how fragile it is. And once you're completely locked into that rhythm, he shatters it. The tonal whiplash that occurs about 1/3 into the film, when we abruptly cut away from the horror to follow AJ in sunny California, is one of the boldest directional decisions in modern horror. And it works because Cregger doesn't try to smooth it over. He wants it to be jarring. One moment we're underground with a shrieking monster, the next we're listening to a grinning actor on the phone trying to deny sexual assault allegations. It feels like a completely different film. And that's the point. Cregger uses this break not only to introduce a crucial character, but to rewire the audience's brain. It's not just a narrative shift, it's an emotional reset. And it forces us to reevaluate what we're watching. Is this still a horror movie? Is it a satire? Is AJ the new lead? That uncertainty becomes its own kind of tension, and Cregger masterfully controls it. The way he directs AJ's scenes is wildly different from how he handles Tess's. Where the first act is slow, intimate, and shadowy, AJ's scenes are fast, wide, and bright. The score is upbeat. The dialogue is casual. Even the cinematography shifts. Where Tess's world was tight and claustrophobic, AJ moves through open spaces, basking in denial and entitlement. But this is all part of Cregger's larger trick. By making AJ's scenes tonally lighter, he lulls us into a false sense of security again. And just as quickly as he did before, he pulls the rug out. AJ returns to the house, oblivious to what's inside, and Cregger draws us right back into the nightmare. But this time, with a new kind of anxiety. AJ's ignorance becomes a different kind of horror. And Cregger lets the tension rebuild, slowly, methodically, until it boils over. One of the most impressive things Cregger does as a director is manage multiple horror tones within the same film. He moves effortlessly between psychological tension, grotesque body horror, social satire, and character-driven tragedy. And he never loses control. That's a rare feat. The mother is terrifying in one scene, heartbreaking in another. AJ is comic relief in one moment, repulsive the next. Even Tess transforms from cautious bystander to emotional anchor. Cregger juggles all of this with careful direction, always knowing when to shift gears and when to hold still. The film is constantly evolving, never content to stay in one genre box. And Cregger's vision is the glue holding it all together. Another brilliant touch is the visual shift during the flashback to Frank's era. Cregger directs this sequence with a wide-angle lens and a highly controlled aesthetic. Everything is brighter, cleaner, eerily calm. It's a near-perfect visual inversion of the grimy horror we've just experienced. Frank's neighborhood looks like a postcard, sunny skies, quiet lawns, perfect houses. But beneath that surface is rot. Cregger doesn't rely on shock or gore in this part. He lets the visuals do the work. Watching Frank move through the world with calm efficiency is terrifying precisely because nothing looks wrong. This sequence is all about mood. It's about the realization that the scariest evil isn't the one screaming in your face. It's the one walking silently through the supermarket. Cregger also understands the power of space and architecture in horror. The house is a character in itself, and his direction ensures we never feel fully oriented within it. Every new hallway, every hidden door, every level beneath the last adds a layer of unease. The deeper we go, the more the house reveals itself, not just as a place, but as a history. Cregger never over-explains its layout or mechanics. He lets us get lost in it. The geography becomes psychological. The basement isn't just underground. It's beneath memory, beneath trauma, beneath everything anyone wanted to pretend wasn't there. And Cregger directs those spaces like they're sacred and profane all at once. Perhaps the most remarkable thing about his direction is his restraint. He rarely uses jump scares. He doesn't lean on gore for easy shocks. When violence happens, it's sudden, shocking, and ugly, but never stylized. He lets horror emerge from silence, from pacing, from the dread of what might be waiting around the corner. And then, when the horror does arrive, it's raw and unflinching. The direction doesn't revel in it. It confronts it. That balance between suspense and brutality, between empathy and shock, is a delicate one. And Cregger nails it every time. By the end of the film, when the final confrontation occurs atop a crumbling water tower, the visual storytelling reaches its emotional peak. The imagery is grand and mythic, Tess and the mother facing one another in the quiet aftermath of chaos. And Cregger holds the final shot with reverence, not for spectacle, but for what it represents. Survival, grief, and the burden of knowing what's been buried beneath the world for far too long. Zach Cregger didn't just direct a horror film. He constructed a labyrinth of tension, trauma, and truth. He weaponized narrative structure, visual space, and emotional ambiguity to create a viewing experience that is as disorienting as it is unforgettable. Every camera move, every tonal shift, every beat of silence is part of his design. He knows exactly when to push and when to hold. And because of that, Barbarian doesn't just show horror, it unearths it. Layer by layer, room by room, frame by frame. The cinematography in Barbarian is a precision-crafted engine of dread. It doesn't just capture the story, it builds it. Every camera angle, every shadow, every creeping dolly shot is a deliberate move in a psychological chess game between the film and the viewer. Zach Kuperstein, the director of photography, doesn't use the camera simply to show us what's happening. He uses it to manipulate what we feel, where we look, and how we anticipate danger. The cinematography becomes a storytelling device in itself, guiding emotion, building suspense, and constantly playing with space, light, and visual misdirection. From the very beginning, the camera feels like it's watching you as much as it's watching the characters. In the opening act, when Tess arrives at the Airbnb and meets Keith, the framing is deceptively simple, clean, symmetrical, with just enough room in the background to make you nervous. There's a deliberate awkwardness in how the characters are framed in relation to each other. Tess is often shot in isolation, even when in conversation. We see her reaction more than we see Keith's actions. This choice creates a subtle sense of paranoia, feeding into the idea that something could be off, even if it isn't. When the camera lingers just a little too long on a hallway or a closed door, it's not because something is going to pop out. It's because it might. And that might is where the dread lives. Lighting plays a massive role in building the film's atmosphere. Early scenes are soaked in warm, domestic light, lamps, hallway bulbs, low-level illumination that feels lived in and familiar. But the shadows are deep, uninviting. Every room seems to have one corner you can't quite see into. As the film descends, literally, into the basement and beyond, the lighting shifts dramatically. We move from cozy yellows to sickly greens and cold blues. The flashlight beam becomes a character of its own. It dictates what we're allowed to see and, more importantly, what remains hidden. The tunnel scenes, lit only by phone lights and the occasional bulb, are drenched in visual uncertainty. This isn't horror that leaps out at you. This is horror that waits just outside the reach of the lens. And then comes one of the most brilliant uses of framing in modern horror: the transition into the tunnel. When Tess finds the rope in the wall and pulls open the hidden door, the camera lingers behind her, almost daring us to follow. When she drops the mirror to bounce light into the stairwell, The light barely illuminates what lies ahead. The frame holds for an impossibly long beat. Nothing moves. Nothing attacks. And yet, the tension is suffocating. This is the cinematography doing heavy lifting, not through movement, but through stillness. It dares the viewer to look deeper, to peer into the blackness. That moment is unforgettable, because the camera becomes a test of your nerve. Do you keep watching, or do you look away? The film also plays with perspective in deeply unsettling ways. One of the most striking visual shifts comes when we enter AJ's story. Suddenly, we're in wide daylight. The aspect ratio changes. The lens opens up. There's breathing room in the frame. But that comfort is false. The cinematography during AJ's scenes is purposefully flat and bright, reflecting his oblivious attitude and detachment from the events we've just witnessed. The house appears less threatening, more banal. He measures the basement with a tape measure like he's checking for termites, not trauma. The absurdity is emphasized by how the camera tracks him. Fluid, smooth, almost comedic in its steadiness. This tonal disconnect is completely intentional, and it only deepens the horror when the tunnels swallow him too. And then there's the unforgettable wide-angle tracking shot that marks the flashback to Frank's past. Here, the cinematography makes a bold departure. We're in the same neighborhood, but it's washed in sterile brightness and suburban order. The camera floats behind Frank in a single, lingering take as he moves through his routine. Calm, methodical, and horrifying in its normalcy. There's no music, no cuts. Just distance. This detachment makes the moment even more chilling. We're not inside Frank's world. We're observing it like a documentary, and that lack of emotional framing makes the evil feel larger and more unsettling. The lenses stretch the image slightly, adding a subtle distortion that tells us something is wrong, even if nothing explicitly disturbing is shown. This use of lens choice and tracking is a powerful reminder of how cinematography can say everything without a single word spoken. Throughout Barbarian, the camera behaves like a character in its own right. It hides, it peers, it freezes in fear. When the mother appears, it doesn't chase her with frantic edits. It watches her. It allows her to move through the frame like a force of nature. Huge, clumsy, and oddly graceful. The horror isn't just in what she does, it's in how she's presented. Her figure often fills the entire frame, her body towering over the lens, the light catching just enough of her expression to make us feel pity even as we're afraid. The choice to light her in blue hues in the final act gives her a ghostly, tragic presence. She's not shot like a monster. She's shot like a fallen deity, broken and blind in a world that doesn't understand her. One of the boldest cinematographic choices comes in the film's climax. As Tess and the mother face off atop the water tower, the camera abandons tight framing for the first time in a while. It pulls back. It gives us scope. We see the size of the moment, the bleakness of the setting, the absurd tragedy of what's about to happen. The lighting is natural, almost indifferent. It's not stylized, not heightened, it's real. And in that realism, the horror lands harder. It's just two women, both broken by different systems, facing a moment of impossible decision. The camera doesn't push in for a dramatic zoom. It simply watches. It bears witness. By the time the final frame rolls, you realize that Barbarian didn't just scare you with story or dialogue. It scared you with composition. It scared you with distance and closeness, with what it let you see and what it refused to show. The cinematography isn't decorative. It's structural. It's what allows the story's themes of trauma, trust, gender power dynamics, and buried horror to come alive. It's what gives the house its claustrophobia, the mother her tragic scale, and Tess her heroic quiet. The lens is never just a window, it's a filter of tension, and everything we see is carefully chosen to keep us on edge, second-guessing, and completely locked in. The editing and pacing of Barbarian are as sharp and cunning as its story. This is a film that doesn't just tell you what kind of experience you're in for, it cuts you into it. Right from the opening moments, the editing plays with audience expectations, lulling you into a rhythm before abruptly breaking it. And that's the secret behind why the film never lets you feel comfortable. The pacing doesn't just guide the story. It manipulates you, keeps you disoriented, and uses its rhythm like a psychological weapon. In the first act, the editing is intentionally restrained. Scenes are allowed to breathe, sometimes even to the point of discomfort. Conversations between Tess and Keith unfold in real time, with long pauses and carefully timed reactions. It feels a little slow, but it's supposed to. This isn't wasted time. The film is building a mood, layering tension through silence and subtle shifts in eye contact. The editor, Joe Murphy, uses these long, uninterrupted takes to plant seeds of unease. Nothing is rushed. Nothing is overcut. It's all about maintaining that tightrope walk between suspicion and normalcy. And just when you think you've settled into the film's tone, everything changes. The transition from the basement horror to AJ's sunny California life is one of the boldest and most abrupt editing moves in modern horror. There's no soft dissolve, no tonal bridge, just a hard cut that smacks the viewer out of one world and drops them into another. It's disorienting, confusing, even funny. And that's entirely by design. This tonal whiplash resets the pacing of the film entirely. Where the first act was slow and tense, AJ's introduction is fast, loud, and overstuffed with exposition. We're suddenly in a completely different rhythm. Faster cuts, wider shots, quick dialogue exchanges, driving music. It feels like we've jumped into another movie. And that's the genius of it. The editing isn't trying to smooth over the story's transitions. It's weaponizing contrast. What makes this work is that the pacing adapts to each character's perspective. With Tess, the film breathes, cautious, quiet, observational. With AJ, the film talks over itself, rushed, cocky, impulsive. The editing shifts to reflect their emotional states. When AJ is frantically measuring square footage in the house, the cuts come quicker, mimicking his desperate, chaotic attempt to reclaim control. When Tess is crawling through the tunnel, the edits slow again, stretching each moment of suspense until it's unbearable. This flexible pacing keeps the film alive and unpredictable, always keyed into the psychology of the characters. In the third act, when both timelines converge and the horror reaches its peak, the editing becomes relentless. Cuts are tighter, transitions sharper, the rhythm building like a heartbeat speeding up before a panic attack. The chase sequences are not just fast, they're precise. We aren't lost in shaky cam chaos. The camera knows where to be, and the edits know when to hit. Each cut reveals just enough, just in time. But even in the chaos, the film doesn't lose its sense of clarity. We always understand who's where, what they're doing, and what the stakes are. That clarity under pressure is a sign of disciplined, intelligent editing. There's also a clever use of anti-editing in the film's flashback. The 1980s sequence with Frank is directed and cut to feel like it's in a time capsule. It uses fewer cuts, longer takes, and a slower camera to lull us into a feeling of distance and detachment. The editing deliberately avoids intensity here. Instead, it becomes observational, almost cold. This creates an eerie tension, because even though the pacing slows down, the horror doesn't dissipate. It just hides under the surface. By pulling back and simplifying the editing, the film builds a new kind of dread, one that comes from stillness rather than action. Timing is everything in horror, and Barbarian nails it. The editing knows exactly when to hold on a shot a few seconds longer than feels comfortable, and exactly when to slam into the next scene like a fist through drywall. Those transitions, those whiplash edits, aren't just stylistic. They're emotional. They hit your nervous system. When AJ meets the mother for the first time, the cut is so jarring and fast that it feels like an actual shock. And yet it's not random. Each sudden moment of violence or dread is carefully calibrated in the edit suite to deliver maximum impact. Even the final moments of the film are perfectly paced. After all the chaos, the editing slows again. The camera lingers on Tess. The silence is allowed to stretch. There's no rush to wrap things up. This isn't a sprint to the finish. It's a slow exhale after an hour and a half of suffocating tension. The audience is given time to sit with the aftermath, to process the trauma along with Tess. And that's not just a writing decision, that's editorial timing. The film knows exactly when to slam the brakes and let the emotion sink in. Ultimately, Barbarian uses editing and pacing not just to keep the story moving, but to shape the experience of watching it. The rhythm of the film isn't consistent because the horror isn't consistent. It comes in waves, some slow and creeping, others fast and violent. The film's cuts reflect that shifting tone and speed with razor-sharp precision. It plays the audience like an instrument, pulling back when you expect a jolt, then delivering the blow when you've just started to breathe again. It's not just that the pacing works, it's that it works against you, keeping you vulnerable, reactive, and completely immersed. That's the kind of editing that makes a horror film not just scary, but unforgettable. The soundtrack and score of Barbarian don't just sit in the background. They stalk you, they whisper in the dark, they wait in the silence. Composer Anna Drubick crafts a soundscape that's less about melody and more about mood, less about music and more about manipulation. Every note, drone, hum, and stretch of silence is deliberately placed to enhance not just what you're seeing, but what you're feeling. It's a score that knows when to hide and when to strike, when to build dread and when to disappear completely, leaving you alone with your nerves. One of the most brilliant things about the music in Barbarian is how it withholds itself. In many horror films, the score acts like a signpost, telling you when something scary is about to happen. Not here. Drubick understands that sometimes the scariest sound is none at all. The film uses silence like a scalpel, creating long stretches of ambient tension where the absence of music makes every footstep, creaking floorboard, or breath feel louder, more exposed, more dangerous. This isn't a wall of sound, it's a minefield of stillness. And when the music does kick in, it doesn't feel comforting. It feels like the trap snapping shut. The main sonic signature of the film isn't a theme or a tune, it's a texture. The score pulses and groans with low-end distortion, ambient growls, warped tones that feel like something alive is crawling just beneath the surface of the screen. These aren't traditional horror strings or synth stabs. They're more primal, more physical. The sound seems to come from the walls, from the tunnels, from the buried trauma of the house itself. The score doesn't scream at you, it breathes down your neck. There are moments when the music becomes almost industrial in tone, grinding, metallic, scraping textures that evoke both claustrophobia and decay. These aren't just sounds, they're environments. When Tess descends into the basement, the score transforms the space into a creature of its own. The tone deepens, pulses slow and heavy, as if the house itself is watching. These low, vibrating frequencies are designed not to be heard so much as felt, deep in your gut. It's a physiological score, one that activates your body as much as your ears. And then there's the contrast. Just when the score has conditioned you to expect subtle menace, the film does something wild. It uses pop music. AJ's storyline introduces upbeat, ironic needle drops that crash against the horror we've just witnessed. The cheerful tracks that accompany AJ's clueless optimism are jarring by design. The editing, cinematography, and sound all shift to reflect this change in tone. And the music becomes a tool of tonal misdirection. You're laughing at the absurdity of AJ measuring square footage while a monster lurks beneath his feet, and the soundtrack is in on the joke. These choices don't break the mood. They reinforce the film's central thesis. You never know what's coming next. When AJ is finally pulled into the terror of the tunnels, the music snaps back into horror mode. But it doesn't just repeat what we heard before. It evolves. The score grows darker, more aggressive, more chaotic. By now, the audience is trained to associate certain sounds with certain spaces. The basement hums. The hallway drones. The tunnel screeches. And then, as the chaos erupts near the climax, the music finally cuts loose. It doesn't go full orchestral, but it does escalate. The textures become harsher, more fragmented. It's like the score is shattering right along with the character's sense of safety. But the film never forgets the power of silence. In one of the most emotionally loaded scenes, Tess and the mother on the rooftop, there is almost no music at all. Just ambient wind, the hum of distance, and the weight of what's about to happen. That restraint is powerful. The score doesn't try to tell you what to feel. It respects the moment. And that's a mark of intelligent composition. The music knows when to lead, and when to vanish. There's also a recurring sonic motif that appears throughout the film. Not quite a theme, but more of a tonal fingerprint. It's a low, warbling hum that always shows up when the story descends into darkness. It appears subtly when Tess first finds the secret tunnel. It returns when AJ sees the horror for himself. And by the time we hear it again in the final sequence, it carries weight. It's a signal, not of danger, but of discovery. And that's what sets this score apart. It's not just tagging along with the action. It's responding to it. It evolves with the story, morphs with the mood, and deepens with the themes. Barbarian's score doesn't dominate. It infiltrates. It settles into your subconscious and changes how you interpret every room, every line of dialogue, every hallway that goes on just a little too long. It doesn't blast its presence. It infects the film, wrapping itself around the characters, the spaces, the secrets. And when the film is over and you find yourself thinking about it in the dark, it's not the visuals that haunt you first. It's the sound. That low hollow hum. That space between breaths. That echo of dread that lingers long after the screen goes black. Barbarian is not just a film about a creepy house and something lurking in the basement. It's a film about what people refuse to see, what they pretend not to hear, and what they choose to ignore. It's a story soaked in the horror of trust, gender dynamics, generational trauma, and the silent rot that grows beneath seemingly normal lives. The film weaponizes its genre elements to peel back layers of cultural fear, starting with the everyday, and then dragging us deep into the grotesque and unspoken. It's a horror film that asks the audience, what makes you afraid? A monster in the tunnel? Or the man who insists he's one of the good guys? One of the film's central themes is trust and the danger of politeness, especially through a gendered lens. Tessa's experience at the Airbnb is every woman's nightmare disguised as a minor inconvenience. The key is double-booked. The strange man is already inside, and now she's supposed to decide whether or not to trust him. Every interaction between Tess and Keith is laced with coded social behavior. He offers to sleep on the couch. He insists she drink the tea he saw her pour. He's overly courteous. But it's too careful, and Tess feels that, and so do we. The movie zeroes in on how women are forced to navigate social danger, while also being conditioned to not overreact. Tessa's survival instincts clash with her manners, and that's the horror. The monster hasn't even appeared yet, but the threat of male entitlement and the pressure on women to be reasonable is already front and center. Then there's the theme of male obliviousness and entitlement, embodied perfectly by AJ. He's not evil in the overt sense. He's just selfish, defensive, and willfully ignorant. His arc isn't a redemption story, it's a slow peeling away of his facade. His initial reaction to being accused of sexual assault is panic. Not about what he did, but about how it affects him. He literally Googles whether he can sell a house with a murder basement in it. He measures square footage in the same space where Tess was screaming for her life. The contrast is brutal, and the film leans into it with dark humor and cold satire. AJ is a walking example of how some men treat the world like their property, even when the world is clearly breaking apart under their feet. His presence explores how the system enables selfishness, and how ignorance can be as dangerous as malice. And then there's the theme of generational abuse and the inheritance of trauma, told most viscerally through the house itself. That place isn't just a location. It's a metaphor for the rot that festers beneath polite society. The flashback to Frank's life in the 1980s is a disturbing pivot. It shows how the evil we're experiencing didn't just appear, it was built. Hidden rooms, secret hallways, decades of violence buried under suburban normalcy. Frank is the origin of the horror, but the film doesn't make him a caricature. He's quiet, methodical, and terrifying in his banality. He represents the theme that real evil is often quiet, undetected, and tolerated. It doesn't roar. It whispers behind closed doors. The mother, then, becomes a symbol of what happens when that evil is left to fester. She's not just a monster. She's the consequence of generational silence. A product of captivity, isolation, and inherited pain. Another major theme is the blindness of systems to suffering, especially when that suffering happens to marginalized people or in bad neighborhoods. The Detroit setting isn't accidental. It's a city known for neglect, decay, and deep racial and economic divides. The house stands in the middle of a crumbling block, the only home with a light on, the only home someone like Tess would have ever rented through an app. No one checks on it. No one responds to cries for help. Even the police, when Tess finally escapes and finds them, ignore her pleas. Why? Because she's dirty, frantic, and standing in the wrong part of town. That moment is one of the most painful truths in the film. That survival doesn't guarantee safety when the world refuses to see your pain. It's a critique of systemic apathy, disguised as a detour in a horror plot. There's also a quiet but resonant theme of compassion and agency, buried under all the violence. Tess doesn't become a final girl because she's lucky. She chooses to go back. She chooses to save someone else, even after she's escaped. She shows empathy toward the mother, even after witnessing her brutality. That kind of emotional complexity, where fear, pity, trauma, and mercy all exist at once, is rare in horror, and the film doesn't resolve it neatly. Tess sees the mother not just as a threat, but as a reflection of what happens when people are caged and forgotten. That moral weight lingers in every decision she makes, and it turns what could have been a simple escape story into something far more layered. Finally, Barbarian offers a brutally honest commentary on how horror thrives in the hidden spaces, both literal and metaphorical. Basements, tunnels, childhood memories, bad reputations, urban decay, gendered assumptions. These aren't just plot devices, they're symbols. The film digs deeper and deeper, physically and thematically, until there's no place left to hide. And by the end, we're left with the message that the real monsters aren't the ones clawing at the door. They're the ones who built the house, closed the basement, and let the screams echo unheard for years. It's not just a haunted house story. It's a story about what happens when we ignore the hauntings we've inherited, when we look away from the people we hurt, and the systems that let us keep hurting them. The horror in Barbarian isn't just in the dark. It's in the silence that lets it grow. The visual effects in Barbarian work not by overwhelming the screen, but by disappearing into the nightmare. This is a film that doesn't scream, "Look at this monster," or throw digital creatures at the audience for cheap thrills. Instead, it commits fully to grounded, grimy realism, where every scratch, every flicker of light, every grotesque detail feels as though it could exist right beneath your own floorboards. The special effects, both practical and digital, are used not to impress, but to disturb, unsettle, and deepen the immersive dread of the world. One of the most impressive aspects of the film's approach to visual effects is how restrained it is. There's nothing flashy here, and that's entirely intentional. Barbarian builds a space where terror comes from what's real, or at least what looks real. The grotesque figure of the mother, for example, is realized primarily through practical effects and prosthetics. There's something deeply unsettling about her design, not because she's covered in CGI textures, but because her body moves like it hurts. Her skin is pale and veined, sagging in places that feel unnatural, and yet she doesn't come off like a video game boss. She's tactile. Her presence feels heavy, physical, and human. And that's the key. The horror doesn't come from her being monstrous. It comes from the reality that she once wasn't. Makeup and prosthetic work do most of the heavy lifting when it comes to the mother's appearance. The practical design makes her terrifying and tragic all at once. Her elongated limbs, misshapen features, and disjointed movement all look like something sculpted in a makeup chair, not on a rendering farm. There might be subtle digital touch-ups, smoothing transitions, enhancing eyes, exaggerating a gesture, but it's impossible to see where the practical ends and the digital begins, and that's exactly how it should be. The effects don't draw attention to themselves. They serve the performance, the space, and the emotional tone of the scene. There's also excellent use of low-light environments to mask visual seams. Much of the film takes place in darkness, tunnels, narrow basements, flickering hallways, and in these environments, less is more. The camera doesn't dwell on visual effects the way a blockbuster might. Instead, it glances. It hints. When the mother lunges from the shadows or crawls through narrow spaces, the effect is terrifying not because of what's rendered on screen, but because the shadows and light are weaponized to create shapes our minds finish for us. The visual effects team understands that suggestion is more powerful than spectacle, and they use darkness as a partner rather than an obstacle. The only moments where digital effects are clearly in play are during stunts or extreme physical sequences, such as the fall from the water tower. Here, the film uses CGI not as a crutch but as an enhancer. The fall is quick, shocking, brutal. And while some digital manipulation is needed to pull it off, it doesn't feel out of place. The weight, the speed, the camera movement, all of it keeps the moment grounded in reality. There's no floaty, physics-defying motion. The scene isn't trying to impress with acrobatics. It's trying to hurt. And that means the CGI is designed to disappear, to sell the fall, not distract from it. Blood and gore are handled with a mix of practical squibs and subtle digital overlays. When violence happens in Barbarian, it's quick, grotesque, and grounded. Heads are crushed, limbs snapped, faces caved in. And these moments land hard because they look real. The impact is brutal because the effects team chooses realism over exaggeration. There's a certain weight and messiness to the violence that can only come from practical elements. Real fluids, real props, real reactions. The digital work supports the mess, filling in the blanks rather than painting over everything. Set design also plays a key role in grounding the effects. The house is a masterpiece of lived-in horror. Every crack in the wall, every discolored tile, every trapdoor and tunnel is textured with grime and decay. Whether enhanced by digital extensions or constructed practically, the result is seamless. The deeper we go into the house, the less cinematic it feels, and that's a good thing. It starts to feel like a real, terrible place that no one should have ever discovered. The visual effects that support this space are invisible in the best way. They make the world feel vast and rotten without ever revealing the trick. What's striking is how well the film balances horror mythology with physical believability. The secret dungeon, the rusted bed frames, the video camera in the corner. All these details feel uncomfortably plausible. This isn't fantasy horror. It's horror rooted in the suggestion that these spaces could exist under our cities, in abandoned neighborhoods, behind walls no one has opened in decades. The effects are there to reinforce that plausibility, to build horror from possibility. Even in its most surreal moments, the film never breaks its visual logic. The effects always support the idea that everything we're seeing is part of the same decaying ecosystem. Whether it's the subtly altered lighting in flashback sequences, or the enhanced depth of the underground maze, the digital tools are used to blend timelines and tones without ever pulling us out of the world. The visual continuity is airtight. The film never looks like it's flipping between styles or affects houses. It maintains a cohesive visual language from start to finish. In the end, Barbarian is a masterclass in how to use effects, practical and digital alike, not as spectacle, but as shadow. The monsters are scary not because they're huge or flashy, but because they feel close, real, forgotten, unchanged. The film never wants you to marvel at its effects. It wants you to believe in its horrors. And it pulls that off not with bombast, but with quiet, calculated, skin-crawling craftsmanship. The visual effects don't dominate the film. They haunt it. The set design and locations in Barbarian aren't just backdrops. They're the backbone of the entire nightmare. Every single wall, hallway, street, and tunnel is telling a story, whispering clues, hiding horrors. The production design doesn't just serve the plot, it builds it. The locations are a layered extension of the film's themes, character psychology, and tonal shifts, and they do more heavy lifting than some entire scripts. You could remove the dialogue, and the house alone would still manage to tell you something is deeply, dangerously wrong. It all begins with the house. From the outside, it's quaint, unassuming, and placed right in the middle of a neighborhood that looks like it was swallowed by time. The contrast is immediate and brilliant. Tessa's Airbnb is lit warmly, it's clean, and it looks recently renovated, until you glance to the left or right. Then you see the decay, the boarded-up windows, the overgrown lawns, the sense of total abandonment. This visual contradiction is the first red flag, and it's not accidental. The neighborhood setting itself becomes a metaphor for forgotten places, buried secrets, and the quiet failure of systems. It's a location that instantly puts you on edge, not because something has happened, but because nothing is happening where something clearly should be. It's the quiet that disturbs. Step inside the house, and the design continues the misdirection. The living room is cozy. There's a couch, books, lamps. The kitchen looks like it's been used recently. It's all just normal enough to lower your guard. But then the details start whispering. The doors creak just a little too loudly. The bathroom lock doesn't feel solid. The basement door swings shut like it's been waiting. These are small, intentional flaws that create subtle tension. The props and furniture are real, lived in, but placed just precisely enough to make you doubt your instincts. It's production design used not just for realism, but for psychological manipulation. Now the basement. That's where everything changes. This isn't just a creepy lower level. It's the first gateway into the film's descent. The shift in tone is immediate. The air seems heavier. The lighting is colder. The objects down there, the mirror, the rope, the hidden door, aren't just plot devices. They're warnings. The space feels like it's been repurposed, not recently, but for a purpose long forgotten. And the moment Tess finds the hidden hallway, the entire concept of the house flips. It's no longer a structure. It's a trap. A vertical narrative device that goes deeper and darker the more you explore it. And when you enter the tunnels, everything about the design screams this was never meant to be seen. The walls are tight, the air feels thick, the layout is disorienting. There's no grand set piece, no Gothic architecture. Just filth, decay, rot. The kind of claustrophobic space where even the air feels wrong. The props are minimal but horrifying. An old mattress, a stained bucket, a broken camera. That camera is a masterstroke of design. It's not explained, just shown. And it tells you everything you need to know about the history of the space without a single line of dialogue. That's the power of good set design. It informs story without speaking. Further down in the maze, the set begins to feel less human, more animalistic. The tunnels are carved without symmetry, without design logic. They don't lead anywhere obvious. They just go deeper. And the visual language of the film starts to suggest that the house has become a kind of organism, expanding, hiding, digesting. The longer you spend in these spaces, the more it feels like you're inside something ancient and wrong. It's a visual metaphor for trauma. Pushed underground, buried in layers, still alive. Contrast all of that with the flashback sequence. Suddenly we're back in the same neighborhood, but decades earlier, and everything is different. The streets are clean, the lawns are manicured, the homes are alive with activity. The house is brighter, the colors warmer, but somehow, it feels even more disturbing. The production design during this sequence is pristine, but that's what makes it terrifying. You realize this is where it started. This neat little home, this quiet block, is the origin of everything grotesque. Frank's world is designed to look harmless, and that's what makes it chilling. The props are all authentic to the period, down to the packaging in the bathroom, the layout of the kitchen, the car in the driveway. But instead of nostalgia, the design delivers menace. What's so effective about Barbarian's set design is how it plays with layers of space. The house itself is like a Russian nesting doll of horror. Each layer you peel back takes you deeper, physically and thematically. The top level is where Tess and Keith negotiate politeness and discomfort. The basement is where secrets start to surface. The tunnel is where the past lives. And the furthest corners, where Frank lies in a shadowed room surrounded by unspeakable things, is where horror becomes history. Each room, hallway, and space tells you something new, not just about the plot, but about the systems of neglect, abuse, and silence that the film is really talking about. Even the final rooftop scene, stark and barren, framed against an empty sky, tells its own story. The production design there strips everything away. No walls, no props, just wind, stone, and consequence. It's the visual opposite of the cramped, oppressive tunnels. A place where Tess and the mother can exist, briefly, with nothing left to hide behind. It's one of the few moments where the space doesn't feel like it's closing in, and even that is loaded with emotional meaning. The locations in Barbarian aren't just where things happen. They are what's happening. The production design is the horror. It's the layers of concealment, the dirt under the nails, the way society covers over its sins with fresh paint. It's a brilliant piece of environmental storytelling, where every object in space pulls you further from comfort, further from safety, and further from the idea that anything in this world was ever as it seemed. The dialogue in Barbarian is one of the film's sharpest tools. It's careful, strategic, often deceptively simple, and always serving something deeper than what's being said. This is not a movie that overloads you with exposition or flashy one-liners. Instead, the script plays with silence, subtext, awkwardness, and misdirection. Every conversation is a battleground between trust and uncertainty, between what characters are saying and what they're not saying. The words themselves may seem ordinary, but the tension between them is what makes the dialogue feel like a fuse burning slowly toward explosion. Take the opening act, for example. Tess and Keith's initial interaction is a masterclass in layered dialogue. It's not just about two strangers navigating an uncomfortable situation. It's about power dynamics, fear, politeness, and survival instincts. The words exchanged between them are tentative and polite, but underneath, there's a constant negotiation happening. Every sentence carries weight. Keith offering her tea seems harmless, but Tess pauses. She didn't see him pour it. Should she drink it? Should she ask? Should she pretend not to be worried? This dynamic is never directly addressed, but it simmers beneath the dialogue like a second conversation neither of them is willing to have. That's expert writing, creating a sense of danger not through what's said, but through how it's said and when silence falls. The dialogue walks a tightrope of realism and tension. Tess often speaks in fragmented thoughts, questioning herself, hesitating before decisions. Her voice feels authentic, not overly written, not theatrical. It feels like someone thinking on her feet, someone trying to stay calm while her instincts scream otherwise. That rawness gives her character depth without having to spell out her fears. She doesn't need a monologue about how she's been hurt before or why she's cautious. It's all in the pauses, the tone, the glances after a question. Keith, on the other hand, is all over compensation. His dialogue is friendly to a fault. He goes out of his way to explain every action, constantly trying to make Tess feel safe, which only makes her, and us, more suspicious. There's a brilliant irony in the script here. The more he tries to seem trustworthy, the more we wonder what he's hiding. Lines like, "I didn't open your wine, just so you know," seem helpful, but they land wrong, like someone trying to cover tracks we didn't ask about. This is the script playing with the audience's own fear and bias, using dialogue to plant doubt even in moments that should feel benign. Then there's AJ. His dialogue is a whole different beast. Where Tess and Keith dance around discomfort, AJ barrels through it. His words are self-centered, panicked, and often hilariously tone-deaf. His conversations are filled with defensive rationalizations, shallow introspection, and offbeat humor. The writing here is satirical without being cartoonish. AJ is allowed to dig his own grave, line by line, and the script never lets him off the hook. He says things that reveal more about him than he understands. When he calls a friend to confess, he still phrases everything to avoid accountability. His dialogue is brutally revealing not because it's emotional, but because it lacks emotional intelligence. That absence becomes its own kind of commentary. The humor in the script is dry, dark, and perfectly timed. There are no traditional jokes, no punchlines, but the way certain lines land is downright hilarious in their absurdity. AJ measuring the square footage of a horror dungeon, muttering things like, "Technically it's usable space," is comic gold not because the line itself is witty, but because of how out of place it feels. The script allows moments of levity to burst through the tension, and those moments never deflate the fear, they sharpen it. The comedy feels like nervous laughter in a funeral home. You're not sure if it's okay, but you can't help it. And then there's the mother. She barely speaks. Her dialogue consists of grunts, cries, and guttural attempts at connection. And yet, somehow, those few vocalizations carry more emotional weight than many films do with paragraphs of monologue. When she says the word baby, it's not played for laughs or horror, it's heartbreaking. The repetition, the tone, the need. It communicates a lifetime of abuse and longing in a single, broken word. That's the brilliance of the script, not just in what's written, but in what it dares to leave unspoken. The flashback scene with Frank is almost entirely void of traditional dialogue. It's minimal, quiet, detached. When he speaks, it's routine, cold, calculated. But his silence is the dialogue. His actions tell you everything. The script allows visual storytelling to take the lead, trusting the audience to pick up on subtext without spoon-feeding it. That restraint is powerful, especially in a genre that often leans on over-explanation. Barbarian avoids exposition dumps in favor of implication, body language, and emotional inference. What makes the dialogue and script truly stand out is their commitment to truthful discomfort. Characters rarely say what they mean directly. They stumble, they backpedal, they say things they regret. Conversations escalate unpredictably, just like in real life. Even the structure of the script, jumping between timelines and perspectives, mirrors how we learn about people. Not in a straight line, but in fragments, in flashes of revelation. The script is built like the house it centers around. Layer after layer, some rooms cozy, others hidden and horrifying, and you never know what the next door will open to. There may not be a single catchphrase or quote that gets printed on t-shirts, but that's the point. The dialogue in Barbarian is meant to linger not because it's flashy, but because it's real. It sticks in your head the way an uneasy conversation sticks with you long after it's over. It's writing that respects its audience, trusts its actors, and shapes the horror not with spectacle, but with subtle, simmering humanity. Barbarian is the kind of horror film that lures you in with the promise of something familiar, only to pull the floor out from under you, literally and figuratively. It doesn't just play with genre conventions, it actively messes with them, breaks them down, and rebuilds them into something stranger, bolder, and far more unsettling than you expected. What starts off feeling like a classic setup, the unsuspecting woman, the creepy Airbnb, the too nice stranger, turns into a roller coaster of subversion where horror tropes are twisted into new, nasty shapes. This is genre execution as sleight of hand, where the film keeps shifting tone and structure just when you think you've figured it out. At first, Barbarian plays the game. The film opens with a scenario horror fans know well. A woman arrives at a house at night. It's raining, something's off, and a man answers the door. Immediately, genre expectations kick in. We've been trained by decades of horror cinema to assume that something terrible is about to happen. And it is, just not in the way you think. The brilliance lies in how the film uses those expectations against us. The Airbnb mix-up could have easily devolved into a typical woman in danger narrative. But the script leans hard into awkward realism instead of overt terror. Every moment between Tess and Keith feels just a little off, but never enough to be sure. That tension, amplified by the horror audience's own internal database of cliches, creates an early atmosphere of dread without needing a single jump scare. And then just when we're settling into that structure, the film changes genres entirely. The narrative cuts away from the horror of the basement and drops us into sunny Los Angeles with AJ, a character who feels like he belongs in a totally different movie. Suddenly, we're in a dark comedy, a Hollywood satire, a commentary on toxic masculinity. The tonal shift is jarring on purpose. It doesn't break the genre, it expands it. Horror isn't just about creatures in the dark. It's also about the people who build the houses and pretend nothing's wrong inside. By flipping the script, Barbarian exposes how the real horror might not be the mother. It might be the man who sees every situation as something he can control, profit from, or walk away from. This genre flexibility continues throughout the film. It weaves in psychological thriller elements, body horror, survival horror, and even a splash of urban legend folklore. But it never leans too far into any single subgenre. Instead, it uses each one like a tool, switching styles, tones, and pacing to reflect character perspective and audience manipulation. The AJ segments are brisk, dialogue-heavy, and absurd. The Tess segments are slow, tension-driven, and grounded. The flashback sequence with Frank shifts into quiet, period piece dread. Each section feels like a different flavor of horror. And together, they form a whole that feels unpredictable and fresh. And when it comes to cliches, the film doesn't just avoid them, it reverses them. Tess is a perfect example of a character who refuses to play the typical horror victim. She's smart, observant, and cautious. She notices red flags. She doesn't wander off blindly into danger. But even when she does make risky decisions, like going back to save someone, those choices come from empathy and agency, not from the script needing her to do something dumb to move the plot forward. The film respects her intelligence and uses it to challenge the genre's outdated habits. Even the mother, who could have easily been a one-dimensional monster, is portrayed with an unexpected layer of sympathy. Yes, she's terrifying, violent, and grotesque, but she's also a product of long-term abuse, isolation, and trauma. The genre convention says monster bad, kill it. Barbarian pauses to ask why the monster exists in the first place, and what it wants. That kind of moral complexity is rare in horror, and it gives the film an emotional weight that lingers well beyond the final scream. When the film does lean into traditional horror elements, chase scenes, hidden tunnels, brutal kills, it does so with incredible control. The suspense is taut, the scares are earned, and the violence is quick, shocking, and grounded. There are no CGI ghosts floating down hallways, no musical stabs telegraphing every scare. The horror comes from timing, silence, and the situation itself. And yet, the film also knows when to pull the rug out and inject moments of dark, absurd humor. AJ fumbling through the horror like a clueless tourist is hilarious, because it comes right after some of the film's tensest sequences. That balance between suspense and satire is part of what makes the genre execution feel so unique. Even structurally, the film messes with convention. The three-act format is scrambled. The protagonist changes halfway through. Backstory is delivered not through clunky exposition, but through a haunting detour into the past that recontextualizes everything we've seen. The scares don't come in regular intervals. There's no steady ramping of tension. Instead, there are peaks and valleys, quiet stretches followed by sudden, explosive bursts of terror. This unpredictability keeps the audience constantly on edge, never knowing what kind of scene they're about to watch next. In the hands of a less confident filmmaker, this genre bending could feel messy or unfocused. But here, it's deliberate and surgical. Every shift, every stylistic detour, serves a purpose. It keeps the audience guessing. It avoids formula. It challenges what horror should look like. And that's exactly what great genre films do. Barbarian doesn't just play in the sandbox of horror. It breaks down the walls, kicks sand in your face, and dares you to keep watching without clinging to the rules. It's horror that remembers how to surprise people again. Barbarian doesn't just flirt with social and cultural commentary. It invites it down into the basement, locks the door, and makes you live with it. The film is a horror movie on the surface, yes, but beneath that skin, it's dissecting some of the most urgent conversations in modern culture. Gender dynamics, toxic masculinity, systemic apathy, generational trauma, gentrification, institutional decay. These ideas are all present, not tacked on like a message board post, but baked directly into the blood and bricks of the story itself. It's not a lecture. It's a slow descent into the dark places we don't want to look at, but maybe should. Let's start with gender. From the opening scene, Barbarian holds a mirror to how women are trained to navigate the world. And the risks that come with trusting the wrong person, even when everything looks safe on the surface. Tess walking into that Airbnb and meeting Keith is about more than just plot setup. It's a real-world anxiety writ large. Every move Keith makes, no matter how polite or well-meaning, is filtered through Tessa's survival instinct. He offers her tea, she hesitates. He insists she take the bed, she pushes back. Every social exchange becomes a risk calculation. The script never says this out loud, but you feel it in every pause, every glance, every moment she chooses not to say what she's really thinking. It's a critique of the societal expectation that women should always be nice, even when their gut is screaming that something's off. And then the film introduces AJ, who practically embodies the modern plague of performative self-victimization and male entitlement. His character is a satire of the good guy, who believes he's being wronged while refusing to take responsibility for his own actions. He doesn't just deny wrongdoing, he rebrands it as a misunderstanding. His self-centered panic over being accused of assault is telling. It's not about the harm he may have caused. It's about his career, his property, his inconvenience. The script slices through his delusion with precision, showing how easily power protects those who refuse accountability. AJ thinks he's the protagonist of his own redemption arc. The film knows better. He's just another man walking into a disaster he created and trying to profit from it. And that's another thread. Capitalism. AJ's decision to measure the square footage of a dungeon used for unspeakable things is not just a dark joke. It's a brutal commentary on how systems of value ignore human suffering. He literally turns horror into property value. In his world, space equals money, regardless of what that space was used for. He walks through a monument to generational violence with a measuring tape, thinking only about resale. It's absurd, but it's also alarmingly believable. The movie skewers the way profit-driven logic can blind people to morality. The more he tries to commodify the house, the deeper he buries himself in its horror. Speaking of the house, Barbarian uses its setting as a physical symbol of cultural decay and forgotten pain. Detroit isn't just a backdrop, it's a statement. A city once booming, now emptied out, pockmarked with poverty, neglect, and stories no one wants to hear. The neighborhood where the house sits isn't just abandoned, it's been discarded by society. There's a powerful message in the fact that no one notices the screams from underground, because no one cares enough to look. Even when Tess escapes and tries to get help, the cops dismiss her. Why? Because she doesn't look like she belongs in the part of town they're willing to protect. The film doesn't need to spell this out. The rejection stings without explanation. It's a gut-punch commentary on how institutions fail those they were supposed to serve. And let's talk about Frank. The flashback to his era isn't just a stylistic shift, it's a deep dive into how evil festers when no one's watching. He's not a masked villain or cartoon monster. He's a quiet man blending into the world, doing monstrous things behind a thin veil of normalcy. The commentary here isn't just about serial predation. It's about how generational abuse is allowed to root itself in silence. Frank's actions lead directly to the creation of the mother, who becomes the film's most tragic figure. Her existence is a direct result of systems and people turning their backs for decades. The film asks us to consider not just how monsters are made, but who lets them be made, and who's left to clean up after them. There's also a sharp critique of how society handles trauma, especially female trauma. The mother is terrifying, yes, but also deeply sad. She's the embodiment of a life born and lived in captivity, shaped by violence, stripped of identity. Her obsession with nurturing, her mangled tenderness. It's horrifying, but also heartbreaking. She is what happens when care is corrupted, when love is deformed by cruelty. She's both monster and victim, and the film refuses to give us the comfort of a simple answer. There is no clean good or evil here. Just people crushed under the weight of what others have done to them. Even the structure of the film itself is a kind of commentary. The way the narrative abruptly shifts from Tessa's horror to AJ's obliviousness mirrors the way serious issues are often sidelined by the louder voices of self-interest. Just when you're fully invested in a woman's terrifying ordeal, the story jerks away to follow a man ranting about losing his show deal. It's maddening. It's intentional. That tonal shift says more about cultural imbalance than a speech ever could. What Barbarian does best is trust the audience. It doesn't hand out morals or beat you over the head with symbolism. It embeds its commentary in the characters, the pacing, the design. It lets you feel the discomfort instead of pointing fingers. The horror feels personal because the commentary feels real, rooted in systems and experiences we recognize, even if we don't want to admit it. This isn't a message movie with a megaphone. It's a scream in a tunnel you didn't know existed. One that echoes back with everything we try to bury. Barbarian doesn't just want you to watch it. It wants to trap you inside it. This is the kind of film that thrives on audience reaction, thrives on uncertainty, and thrives on tension so thick you can hear it pressing against your eardrums. It's engineered to provoke strong, visceral responses, gasps, shouts, nervous laughter, horrified silence. Every twist, every unexpected shift in tone, every jolt of brutality is calculated not just to scare you, but to get you talking. This isn't a one-and-done experience. It's the kind of movie that lives in your head long after the credits roll, begging to be rewatched, reanalyzed, and argued over. The opening act alone is a test of audience nerves. You sit there with Tess as she sizes up Keith, trying to decide if he's charming or dangerous, if his awkwardness is genuine or manipulative. And the beauty of it is, you're doing the same thing she is star. The film puts the viewer in the same seat of unease, weighing every word, every microgesture, every offer of tea like it's a potential death sentence. It's not just suspense, it's audience participation. You're not passively watching Tess decide whether to trust Keith. You are Tess. You feel her discomfort in your gut, and the tension builds with every seemingly harmless interaction. When the first major shock finally comes, the audience doesn't just flinch, they explode. Then, right as everyone's blood pressure hits its peak, the movie cuts. The screen goes black. Sunny skies. A convertible. A ridiculous pop song. It's AJ. It's a comedy now. The collective whiplash in the theater is almost comedic in itself. People sit there stunned, not sure if they're watching the same movie. And that confusion is part of the thrill. This sharp pivot breaks every rule about tone continuity, and audiences love it because it's unexpected. It shakes off the comfort of predictability and dares you to recalibrate. It's a challenge. Are you paying attention? Are you ready to follow this story where it wants to go? not where you think it should go. AJ's storyline plays like a dark mirror, laced with humor that's as uncomfortable as it is hilarious. You watch him fumble his way through horror with a measuring tape, reacting to pure nightmare fuel with the priorities of a man trying to boost his Zillow listing. Audiences laugh, but it's uneasy laughter, the kind that bubbles up because it's either that or scream. These tonal shifts keep viewers on edge, constantly recalibrating their expectations. Every scene is a tightrope walk between dread and absurdity, and that unpredictability becomes part of the fun. People start second-guessing everything. Is this a slasher? A psychological thriller? A social satire? The film never tells you. It just keeps moving forward, daring you to keep up. And then there's the horror itself. The scares, the grotesque imagery, the bursts of violence. They land hard. Not because they're constant, but because they're timed with surgical precision. When the mother first emerges from the shadows, the reaction is instant and universal. Shocked gasps, hands flying to mouths, a sudden wave of frozen disbelief. And it doesn't let up. The horror sequences are relentless but never numbing. They're paced for maximum tension and delivered with real weight. When something awful happens, it doesn't feel cheap or staged. It feels like a punch to the chest. But Barbarian isn't just shock value. It digs deeper, and audiences feel that too. There's genuine emotional resonance, especially in the final act. When Tess returns to that house after escaping, gasps turn into stunned silence. You can feel the audience shifting. Now they're not just scared for her, they're with her. Her decision to go back isn't just a plot point. It's an emotional commitment, and it turns a tense thriller into a story about empathy, courage, and sacrifice. That's the moment where the horror becomes something bigger. That's the moment when people stop seeing Tess as a horror trope and start seeing her as a person. That's when the film hits on something rare, emotional depth wrapped in blood and grime. And it doesn't stop there. The mother's final moments are disturbing, yes, but also strangely tender. Audiences don't just recoil, they feel. There's sadness, confusion, maybe even a bit of guilt. It's the kind of ending that doesn't tell you how to feel. It just lays the pieces in front of you and lets the weight of it all settle. It invites post-movie conversations that don't revolve around just what happened, but why it happened, how we feel about it, and what it means. That's the kind of engagement most films dream about. And the rewatch value? Through the roof. The first time you watch Barbarian, you're riding the twists. The second time, you're watching the setup. The clues. The camera placement. The facial expressions. You're watching how the film toys with you. Every scene has a second layer, and viewers love picking it apart. It becomes a kind of puzzle. One where the scares still land even when you know they're coming. Because now you're watching them unfold from a new angle, appreciating the craft. The best part? This is a movie people want to talk about. Not just horror fans, but casual moviegoers, critics, skeptics. Everyone who's ever rented an Airbnb or second-guessed a stranger. Everyone who's been unsure whether to trust a smile. Barbarian hits those nerves, and the reactions spill over into conversations, debates, rewatches, and late-night YouTube deep dives. It doesn't just entertain. It sticks. It spreads. Because at its core, Barbarian knows exactly how to play the audience. It earns screams, earns laughs, earns reflection. And it never plays the same card twice. It's not a movie you watch and forget. It's a movie you survive, and then tell everyone about. Comparing Barbarian to other horror films isn't just interesting. It's necessary, because it's the kind of movie that thrives on appending expectations that have been drilled into audiences by decades of genre programming. On the surface, it might look like just another entry in the creepy house subgenre, but once you step inside that Airbnb, it becomes clear that Barbarian isn't playing by the same rules. It stands alongside and often above its genre peers not by rejecting horror traditions, but by expertly manipulating them, twisting them into new, unpredictable forms. Start with the setup. A woman, a strange man, a house in a rundown neighborhood. It immediately draws comparisons to psychological slow-burn horror like The Invitation or It Follows, where tension builds through social discomfort and uncanny normalcy. Like those films, Barbarian understands the power of unease. But while those movies simmer with dread and gradually unravel, Barbarian slams the brakes and reboots itself halfway through. pulling off structural gymnastics that most horror films wouldn't dare attempt. Instead of escalating within a single storyline, it rips you out of that narrative and drops you into something tonally opposite. Where the Babadook or Hereditary march down a clear thematic path of grief and trauma, Barbarian chooses chaos. It zigzags, it jerks, it dares you to keep your footing. And then there's the shift to comedy, which recalls the tonal wildness of films like Get Out and American Psycho. But where Get Out balances horror and satire with sharp political clarity, Barbarian is more slippery. Its comedy, especially through AJ's character, feels almost cruel in its timing. 1 minute, you're horrified by a woman's underground captivity. The next, you're watching a disgraced actor measuring dungeon square footage for a real estate appraisal. The movie doesn't wink. It just slaps you across the face with tonal whiplash and dares you not to laugh. In this way, it feels like a spiritual cousin to something like Cabin in the Woods, but far grimmer, less meta, more interested in the rot beneath the floorboards than the mechanics of the horror genre itself. When it comes to the evil house trope, Barbarian has plenty of cinematic relatives. Think The People Under the Stairs, Don't Breathe, or even the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. In each of these, a house becomes more than a location. It's a prison, a monster, a living symbol of the horrors lurking beneath polite society. Barbarian follows in that tradition, but it distinguishes itself by layering those horrors across generations. The house in this film doesn't just hide something evil. It contains it. It's been absorbing pain for decades, and now it spits it back out. While Don't Breathe plays with physical blindness, Barbarian explores moral blindness. How people can ignore suffering when it doesn't inconvenience them. How monsters are allowed to fester in the dark as long as they stay quiet. In terms of structure, Barbarian is most often compared to something like Psycho, a film that kills off its apparent protagonist early and reinvents itself midstream. That's a rare move in horror and a risky one, but Barbarian makes it feel fresh by doing it not just once but multiple times. The audience is constantly being asked to reset their expectations, like a haunted house that changes its layout while you're walking through it. That trick isn't just clever, it's effective. It creates the kind of unpredictability most modern horror avoids in favor of jump scares and formula. Now, if we're talking about franchise horror, Barbarian is light years away from your typical sequel churn machine. Unlike films from the Conjuring universe or the never-ending parade of Insidious spin-offs, this film feels self-contained, unpredictable, and defiantly uninterested in building a brand. There's no setup for a sequel, no universe building, no ghost nun waiting in the wings. It's not about selling the next movie, it's about unsettling this one. And that makes it more in line with the likes of The Witch or Saint Maud, films that exist to disturb, not to franchise. As for where it fits in director Zach Cregger's filmography, Barbarian is a massive, shocking departure. Cregger was known primarily for comedy, part of the sketch group The Whitest Kids You Know. To go from absurdist sketches to one of the most tightly executed horror films in recent memory is nothing short of wild. But that background in sketch comedy may actually explain the movie's success. Sketch writing requires quick pivots, tonal control, and an understanding of how to subvert expectations fast. All skills that Cregger uses with brutal efficiency here. He knows exactly when to let the tension build, and when to flip the scene on its head. That comedic sensibility isn't used for laughs alone. It's used for structure, surprise, and rhythm. It's what makes Barbarian feel so alive, so reactive. When placed side by side with other standout horror films of the 2020s, Barbarian earns its place at the table not by being louder or gorier, but by being smarter. It doesn't rely on the supernatural, it doesn't hand you a neat metaphor, and it doesn't hold your hand. It challenges the way horror should work, refuses to stick to a lane, and still manages to land every scare, every laugh, every gasp. It's not just a movie that works, it's a movie that plays. And horror at its best has always been a genre that thrives when it's willing to break the rules. Barbarian doesn't just break them, it remodels the whole house. Barbarian doesn't just want you to watch it, it wants to trap you inside it. This is the kind of film that thrives on audience reaction, thrives on uncertainty, and thrives on tension so thick you can hear it pressing against your eardrums. It's engineered to provoke strong, visceral responses, gasps, shouts, nervous laughter, horrified silence. Every twist, Every unexpected shift in tone, every jolt of brutality is calculated not just to scare you, but to get you talking. This isn't a one-and-done experience. It's the kind of movie that lives in your head long after the credits roll, begging to be rewatched, reanalyzed, and argued over. The opening act alone is a test of audience nerves. You sit there with Tess as she sizes up Keith, trying to decide if he's charming or dangerous, if his awkwardness is genuine or manipulative. And the beauty of it is, you're doing the same thing she is star. The film puts the viewer in the same seat of unease, weighing every word, every microgesture, every offer of tea like it's a potential death sentence. It's not just suspense, it's audience participation. You're not passively watching Tess decide whether to trust Keith. You are Tess. You feel her discomfort in your gut, and the tension builds with every seemingly harmless interaction. When the first major shock finally comes, the audience doesn't just flinch, they explode. Then, right as everyone's blood pressure hits its peak, the movie cuts. The screen goes black. Sunny skies. A convertible. A ridiculous pop song. It's agey. It's a comedy now. The collective whiplash in the theater is almost comedic in itself. People sit there stunned, not sure if they're watching the same movie. And that confusion is part of the thrill. This sharp pivot breaks every rule about tone continuity, and audiences love it because it's unexpected. It shakes off the comfort of predictability and dares you to recalibrate. It's a challenge. Are you paying attention? Are you ready to follow this story where it wants to go, not where you think it should go? AJ's storyline plays like a dark mirror, laced with humor that's as uncomfortable as it is hilarious. You watch him fumble his way through horror with a measuring tape, reacting to pure nightmare fuel with the priorities of a man trying to boost his Zillow listing. Audiences laugh, but it's uneasy laughter, the kind that bubbles up because it's either that or scream. These tonal shifts keep viewers on edge, constantly recalibrating their expectations. Every scene is a tightrope walk between dread and absurdity, and that unpredictability becomes part of the fun. People start second-guessing everything. Is this a slasher? A psychological thriller? A social satire? The film never tells you. It just keeps moving forward, daring you to keep up. And then there's the horror itself. The scares, the grotesque imagery, the bursts of violence. They land hard. Not because they're constant, but because they're timed with surgical precision. When the mother first emerges from the shadows, the reaction is instant and universal. Shocked gasps, hands flying to mouths, a sudden wave of frozen disbelief. And it doesn't let up. The horror sequences are relentless but never numbing. They're paced for maximum tension and delivered with real weight. When something awful happens, it doesn't feel cheap or staged. It feels like a punch to the chest. But Barbarian isn't just shock value. It digs deeper, and audiences feel that too. There's genuine emotional resonance, especially in the final act. When Tess returns to that house after escaping, gasps turn into stunned silence. You can feel the audience shifting. Now they're not just scared for her, they're with her. Her decision to go back isn't just a plot point. It's an emotional commitment, and it turns a tense thriller into a story about empathy, courage, and sacrifice. That's the moment where the horror becomes something bigger. That's the moment when people stop seeing Tess as a horror trope and start seeing her as a person. That's when the film hits on something rare. Emotional depth wrapped in blood and grime. And it doesn't stop there. The mother's final moments are disturbing, yes, but also strangely tender. Audiences don't just recoil, they feel. There's sadness, confusion, maybe even a bit of guilt. It's the kind of ending that doesn't tell you how to feel. It just lays the pieces in front of you and lets the weight of it all settle. It invites post-movie conversations that don't revolve around just what happened, but why it happened, how we feel about it, and what it means. That's the kind of engagement most films dream about. And the rewatch value? Through the roof. The first time you watch Barbarian, you're writing the twists. The second time, you're watching the setup. The clues. The camera placement. The facial expressions. You're watching how the film toys with you. Every scene has a second layer, and viewers love picking it apart. It becomes a kind of puzzle. One where the scares still land even when you know they're coming. Because now you're watching them unfold from a new angle, appreciating the craft. The best part? This is a movie people want to talk about. Not just horror fans, but casual moviegoers, critics, skeptics. Everyone who's ever rented an Airbnb or second-guessed a stranger. Everyone who's been unsure whether to trust a smile. Barbarian hits those nerves, and the reactions spill over into conversations, debates, rewatches, and late-night YouTube deep dives. It doesn't just entertain. It sticks. It spreads. Because at its core, Barbarian knows exactly how to play the audience. It earns screams, earns laughs, earns reflection. And it never plays the same card twice. It's not a movie you watch and forget. It's a movie you survive, and then tell everyone about. Comparing Barbarian to other horror films isn't just interesting. It's necessary, because it's the kind of movie that thrives on upending expectations that have been drilled into audiences by decades of genre programming. On the surface, it might look like just another entry in the creepy house subgenre, but once you step inside that Airbnb, it becomes clear that Barbarian isn't playing by the same rules. It stands alongside and often above its genre peers, not by rejecting horror traditions, but by expertly manipulating them, twisting them into new, unpredictable forms. Barbarian isn't part of a franchise, doesn't rely on established lore, and has no cinematic universe to tie into. Yet that's exactly what makes it feel so electric in a media landscape overrun by sequels, spin-offs, and prequels. It drops you into its world cold, with no safety net of previous films or recurring characters to cling to. There's no villain whose backstory you already know, no Easter eggs to decode, no fanservice moment where a character says a familiar catchphrase. It's not concerned with nostalgia or continuity. It's concerned with immediacy, with being its own beast, built from the ground up, terrifying because it's unanchored. And that freshness is part of its power. Because it's not part of a franchise, Barbarian gets to make choices most big studio horror films wouldn't dare attempt. It can shift protagonists mid-movie. It can play with structure. It can end without cliffhangers or sequel bait. It can kill its most recognizable actor early and not worry about how that'll affect future box office projections. It has nothing to preserve, no brand to protect. That freedom allows it to take risks, and those risks are what make it stand out so boldly in the current horror ecosystem. But while it isn't part of a franchise, it does have a place in horror history, a conversation with the genre that feels deeply aware of what came before. In terms of tone and narrative misdirection, it echoes the DNA of genre-shifting classics like Psycho, which famously pulled the rug out from under audiences by killing off its main character halfway through. Barbarian updates that shock tactic for a new era, combining it with modern anxieties, Erb's social awkwardness, toxic masculinity, and stitching them together with unexpected tonal turns. Where Psycho used the motel as a site of secret psychosis, Barbarian uses the rental home as a symbol of misplaced trust and buried horror. There are also echoes of The People Under the Stairs, a 1991 film that similarly used the architecture of a house to explore issues of abuse, secrecy, and societal neglect. Barbarian can be seen as a modern descendant of that lineage, drawing on the idea that horror doesn't always come from the supernatural, but from what people are willing to do when no one is watching, and what systems allow them to get away with it. That connection to the past is felt more thematically than narratively, but it's there, simmering just beneath the floorboards. If anything, Barbarian feels like a spiritual reaction to the very idea of franchising in horror. It's a film that resists the industrial machinery of modern horror cinema. There's no origin story for the mother, no detailed mythology to be mined for prequels. Frank's past is barely explained, just enough to terrify, never enough to satisfy. There's no spin-off about AJ's Hollywood fall from grace, no ghostly follow-up about other people who rented the house. It avoids the temptation to explain too much, because explanation is the enemy of fear. Mystery is preserved, and in preserving it, the film keeps its edge sharp. Yet ironically, Barbarian is the kind of film that could spark a franchise. Audiences left theaters buzzing with questions about Frank, about the tunnels, about what came before, and what might come after. But the film doesn't chase those questions. It lets them hang. That restraint is rare in a genre that so often commodifies mystery into content. Instead of giving you volume 2, Barbarian gives you closure in a different sense. Emotional, thematic, structural. It's complete as it is, and in doing so, It quietly challenges the franchise model by proving that one story, told well and without compromise, can be more effective than a dozen stitched together for continuity's sake. In the broader context of horror cinema, Barbarian feels like a flag planted in the soil, declaring that original, standalone horror can still shock, still innovate, still dominate conversation. It reminds us that not every terrifying story needs to be serialized. Some are best told once, in one brutal breath, and then left to echo in the dark. Barbarian is one of those rare horror films that takes a modest budget and flips it into a box office phenomenon, not through flashy effects or big-name stars, but through precision, surprise, and word-of-mouth wildfire. With a production budget of around $4 to $5 million, this movie wasn't working with blockbuster cash. It didn't have giant set pieces, globe-trotting locations, or CGI monsters eating up the funds. What it did have was a tight, inventive script, a handful of well-chosen locations, and a director who knew how to stretch every dollar for maximum suspense and impact. This is low-budget horror at its sharpest, lean, focused, and all muscle. That small budget ended up being one of the film's biggest strengths. Because the film keeps things mostly grounded in a single house and a small cast, it's able to pour resources into mood, lighting, sound design, and that slow-boil tension that keeps audiences squirming. It doesn't waste money trying to convince you it's bigger than it is. It knows the scariest stuff happens in shadows, in silence, and just out of frame. Every dollar spent on this film went toward atmosphere and execution, and it shows. It looks and feels more expensive than it is, not in terms of scale, but in how polished and deliberate every scene is. Now let's talk about the box office. Barbarian didn't just earn back its budget, it absolutely devoured it. The film grossed over $45 million worldwide, turning a single-digit million-dollar investment into a tenfold return. That kind of profit margin is the stuff studios dream of, especially in a genre like horror where financial risk can be relatively low, but returns can be astronomical if the film hits the cultural nerve. And Barbarian didn't just hit it, it stabbed it, twisted it, and made audiences line up to experience the pain all over again. What makes that box office performance even more impressive is that it didn't rely on traditional marketing bombast. There wasn't a months-long media blitz or big-budget campaign with endless TV spots and tie-ins. The trailers gave almost nothing away, just enough to spark curiosity, not enough to spoil the ride. The film relied heavily on mystery, letting the audience's curiosity do the heavy lifting. That gamble paid off big time. Once people started seeing it, the real marketing machine kicked in, word of mouth. Suddenly, social media lit up with cryptic posts. Go in blind, people said. Don't look up anything. That kind of organic buzz doesn't just sell tickets, it creates events. Audiences didn't just go see Barbarian, they became evangelists for it. They dragged friends to theaters. They posted shocked reactions online. They debated every twist and turn in group chats. This wasn't a passive watch. It was an experience, and that's what kept people coming back. That kind of audience-driven momentum is worth more than any paid campaign. It's rare, and it's powerful. And in this case, it turned a small, weird, structurally daring horror film into a box office monster. Critics helped too. Reviews came in hot, praising its unpredictability, its structure, its willingness to swing for the fences. That critical acclaim gave it legitimacy, especially for viewers who might have otherwise written it off as just another horror movie. It became the movie you had to see, not because of spectacle, but because of the conversation happening around it. The film's box office trajectory also benefited from its release strategy. It wasn't dumped into a crowded summer lineup or buried in the holiday shuffle. It hit theaters in early September, a time when audiences are hungry for something new and spooky, but not overwhelmed by competition. That timing gave it room to breathe and grow. It had legs, staying in theaters longer than expected and continuing to pull in viewers as word spread. And let's not forget how the film's small-scale setting ironically played into its financial success. A movie like this doesn't require massive production spend because it understands the horror of less. Less space, less light, less exposition. Every creative decision was made with budget in mind, but instead of compromising, the film embraced those limitations and made them part of its identity. That confidence translated into profit. So while it may not have started with the budget of a Marvel movie or the expectations of a franchise reboot, Barbarian did what so many films try and fail to do. It made a massive impact on a small investment. It turned minimal resources into maximum fear, and fear into ticket sales. It's a case study in how a smart idea, a strong vision, and a little mystery can flip the usual financial logic on its head. The monster might live in the basement, but the real beast was upstairs, raking in box office gold. If you're planning to experience Barbarian for the first time, you better clear your schedule, turn off your lights, put your phone on silent, and lock your doors, because this isn't the kind of movie you casually watch while scrolling. This is a sit all the way through and clutch your seat kind of ride, and the platform you choose to watch it on can either crank the tension or completely dull the effect. So where should you find it, and what's the absolute best way to let it haunt your nerves? Originally, Barbarian had a theatrical release, and for those lucky enough to catch it on the big screen, that was the peak experience. The darkened cinema, the hushed audience, the jump scares landing in unison like punches to the chest. It was a communal panic session, the kind that has strangers gasping together and nervously laughing during scene breaks just to release tension. But even if you missed the theatrical run, the movie's brilliance hasn't dimmed. In fact, watching it at home might just be the next best thing, as long as you do it right. Right now, Barbarian is available on major streaming platforms where horror fans tend to gather. If you've got access to a platform known for showcasing recent genre films and buzzy originals, odds are you'll find Barbarian there. It might also pop up in your digital rental store, available to rent or buy on demand. If you're someone who likes a one-time adrenaline shot, renting it works great. But if you're the kind of viewer who likes to rewatch and obsess over every breadcrumb the filmmakers dropped, owning it is a solid choice. This is one of those films where a second watch reveals just how meticulously everything was placed, even the smallest of details in those early scenes. Now let's talk environment. Watching Barbarian on a laptop with background noise, in the middle of the day, with people walking in and out of the room? That's horror blasphemy. This film thrives in total darkness. It needs quiet. It needs focus. Because it doesn't announce its scares. It creeps toward them. It builds slow dread in silence, in awkward pauses, in that weird off-kilter lighting that makes you question what you're seeing. Distractions dilute the experience. So turn your home into a private theater, even if it's just your bedroom. Pull the curtains, crank the volume, and let the film grab you. And here's the fun part. If you're watching with friends, don't spoil anything. No trailers. No plot summaries. No character names. Just sit them down and press play. Half the power of Barbarian is in its structure, its surprise turns, and the way it constantly pulls the rug out from under you. Watching someone else go through that, blind and unsuspecting, is a reward all its own. It becomes a game of watching the watcher, seeing their eyes widen, hearing them gasp, and listening to their post-film ramblings as they try to process what they just saw. So whether you're catching it on your favorite streaming service or renting it digitally, the key is immersion. This film was made for full attention, full volume, and full commitment. It doesn't need IMAX or surround sound to be effective, but it does need your trust. Let it take control of your evening. Let it mess with your head. Let it convince you to never trust a well-lit Airbnb again. That's where the magic lives. And it's waiting for you, just a play button away.